In case something bad would happen and you can only save one person, that being either your spouse or your child, whom would you choose? This was supposed to be a tough question, and well, you shouldn't be surprised that oftentimes people might even argue for the answer. But the answer could and should be taken as very simple. But the answer, even simple, it will definitely differ per individual, per life experience, and obviously, most importantly, per age. If we are to think a bit about life, well, one first and foremost should remember that we are nothing else but some temporary travelers within this cosmos, and our journey, let's say, will only last as long as this physical body lasts. In case people have forgotten their mortality, you have to understand that this question will definitely take your mortality into account. Why? Because based on your mortality, you might actually make a different choice, based on your own wisdom, based on your own age as well. See, when you are young, a couple can, well, easily give up, let's say, their child and choose to live together. This might be definitely painful, but let's take into account each and every one of the two possibilities. The first one is giving up your child. Definitely, it will feel very crippling because, in the end, whether you give up your child or your spouse in this situation will definitely feel crippling to a normal human. And I'm talking specifically about normal humans, not about narcissists or things like that. And the point is, if one chooses to give up on their child, well, if they are at a very young age, they will simply be able to conceive another child. This doesn't mean that they became ignorant to the first one. Having lost a child does not mean that you should never conceive another child. Surely, this is a choice that the parents need to take together, and if they choose to have no child, well, then it is up to them. Let's not forget choosing to lose either of the two, or and obviously saving the other will definitely be a loss and a grievance to in either of the cases. This is not a question with a happy ending. This is a question where you will grieve either of the situations. And, well, let's be honest, you will definitely wish you would have also made the other choice, not because you regret having that current person, but also because the grass always looks greener on the other side, and we are programmed since birth to always think that the other choice would have been more impactful or a better choice nonetheless. If one chooses to give up on their child, they can at least live their life with their beloved person. And from this standpoint, one has to take into account a wise point. A child is not someone who belongs to you. Yes, surely you, as parents, allowed him to experience this cosmos, but let's not be forgetful of one thing. A child definitely will leave you sooner or later. It is their destiny in a way, and it is how things go. I always remind people if you lose track of how things function, if you forget how life functions, just take a look at nature. Yes, or oftentimes, parents fail their children, and the cubs, or the whatever way you want to call them, kids, cubs, the offsprings. Some of them die, some of them survive. And oftentimes, especially the first few births, the mother can be sloppy and obviously may lose their children easily. At the same time, if we think a bit about food can also be scarce because in nature animals don't have hospitals or things that can allow them to survive better just like our children have. Sure, our society is not perfect and obviously there's some genocidal maniacs here and there, but in the end in society you have way more chances to survive. And this could also be taken into account. This can also be taken into account as a fair point, because at a very young age, obviously, you can raise a second child, another child. Maybe they will not get to meet their departed sibling, but in the end, it doesn't mean that you cannot have a good family with the new offspring. If we are to think a bit about saving the child, then you have to think a bit about one other detail. Saving the child means that you will lose your spouse, yes, whether the man or the woman. Now, the thing is this: A man, especially if they're young, they will feel able and willing to sacrifice themselves even at a greater age. They will feel willing to sacrifice themselves so that their wife and the child will survive. Yes? But then one thing should come to mind. If you save the child, the question comes as this. You have to live now life with an absent spouse, and the child will definitely suffer because of that. Surely you will think the child is not replaceable, but a new spouse can be made, yes? But the question is, do you think your child can easily go through that? And obviously, this is a trap question because the answer differs per individual. You will probably not have the same life with a new spouse, and obviously, you will feel a grievance towards the lost spouse, and obviously, the new spouse may not necessarily be the best, and the child may not necessarily like the new spouse as much. There's also the happy situation where the child gets over the loss of their spouse, their father or mother, their parent, their lost parent. They will go get over it, but some things may still return, and memories and the such might still pull them down, but there are great chances that they will also go get over that. If we are to think a bit about this, raising a child without a parent obviously will become a huge problem because now all the burden falls upon your shoulders. Whether you are the mother or the father, the burden now is suddenly much bigger because you also have to take care of their missing part. Yes? And the child will have to undergo a much worse life. And obviously, the impact on the child differs whether they are young or, whether they are an infant. Because chances are, if they're an infant, they will not suffer for the moment. Unconsciously, they will feel the loss of their parent, but in time, things can be taken slowly and they can be made to understand that something led to the loss of their parent. And you also have to understand that you might actually be blamed for the loss of their parent because obviously it will hurt them a lot in time, especially when they become more knowledgeable of life and when they will compare themselves with the other friends that they will have, classmates and the such, who have a full family, and in the eyes of your child those children will look way happier than they will ever be, because let's not forget, the grass will always seem to look greener on the other side. So when we think a bit about that, as groups age in time, people become slowly and surely more aware of the fact that your child does not belong to you. Surely you allow them to experience this wonderful life with its horrible parts as well. But the point is very simple. When you grow older, you get, or you should get, more aware of your own mortality. In this case, we have two situations. And one situation is where you have not experienced the departure of any close relative, especially your parents. This one should also be taken as a good thing from a certain standpoint only. See, in some situations, very few situations, some people will be happy that their parents pass away because maybe they lived in a narcissistic environment or a very toxic one, and suddenly they feel that a weight has been pulled over their shoulders and their chest and their whole body once those toxic parents have departed. Yes? And obviously they will feel bad because they felt good about it, but it's a natural feeling of relief that you should never feel bad about. Sure, you will grieve your parents, but the departure of your parents should remind you of the mortality of life. You're not here forever. So, such tragedies, whether they perished in an accident or they passed away peacefully, this can happen at any given moment. Yes, this can happen at any given moment, and tragedy is also a natural thing within life. So, in a situation where you can only save one of the two, obviously it's going to be horrible irrespective of which choice you make. And, in many tragedies, it might happen that the one who wants to save either of the two also ends up perishing. Yes, there are such situations as well. They might actually pull it out that they save both, or they might save both of them, but it might be too late because, let's say, in a burning house, the fire itself is not necessarily the problem, but the lack of oxygen. Maybe you get to pull the bodies out of everyone in there, but it might be a little too late, and maybe the ambulance is not there on time to simply save them, yes, to give them oxygen and bring them back to life. That might happen as well. If we are to think a bit about this, well, whoever has experienced the passing of a parent most likely have realized one thing. One moment your parents were there with you. Suddenly, they just became a memory. They were no longer accessible. They were no longer there for you. And the journey that they had through this life simply ended. They're no longer your parents. There will be your parents only within your memories, because the piece of life that left those physical bodies will simply venture on its own travels, and all its businesses with you are simply ended. It is a harsh truth that people have to simply acknowledge. Yes, there's too much fantasy in this world about people reuniting in the heavens and things like that. Such things will not happen. They will never ever happen. Whoever has passed away, they have passed away, and that's it. Nobody will recognize you there in heavens or whatever imagined place you may think of. All of those are just imaginations of the mind and coping mechanisms that, people who you hold dear, especially when you feel abandonment issues, you will feel that you will meet again with those people. Yes? But, well, funnily speaking, your internal struggles and karma will more likely want to focus on those people just because they want to experience. Yes, your unconscious patterns will want to experience that abandonment yet again. That is why you attach to them, not because they would be dear to you. If they crippled you so much with attention deficit, definitely they didn't care much. And they might actually start caring for you when you're at an age that you no longer need that care that much. Yes? So when it comes to this situation, you might end up in the same situation where abusive parents will tell your children, whom do you want to choose, your father or your mother? And the child would be too young to figure out whether they would want to choose either of the parents. Yes, they'll definitely want both the parents, not just one. So if we are to think a bit about this, the question comes with a very big grievance. It's not easy to lose either of the two. But a wise person, especially at an older age, will know that children will go away. Losing your spouse means losing someone you have invested a lot of time close by. And, well, as you age up, it's gonna be hard to find a replacement. And, well, people become usually retrogrades, or, they entrench themselves in their own bubbles, and it's going to be hard to simply find someone else. Sure, there are situations where some people might find a new spouse even at a older age. Maybe they are not going to get married, but they can still choose to live together, because one has to think on the long run as well. Your child will leave your family sooner or later because they have to design their own. They have to live their own life, and everyone, every normal human will seek to keep a certain bond with their parents, even if they are toxic. But, there will always be a push from life to simply experience life and to simply detach from the old. Your parents carry certain energies that are not going to be always there. They're not always going to be useful for you. Maybe they are protective when you are young, but at a certain age you must detach, because that is the means of life. So when your child leaves, well, you will remain with your spouse, because in the end, whether you got married or not, but still you took an oath to take care of a child, most likely that oath also included the fact that you will live together as long as possible, or hopefully until death do you apart. Yes? So your spouse, you have invested a lot of time with them. So therefore, you know, they are a much better piece of life than a child, if you are to take it from this particular standpoint. Why? Because a child is still a young traveler. Yes, the spouse is already old, and yet again, depending on experience, maybe they can bring way more to the world the way they are. Yes? Now we live in a world where wars spring everywhere, and death and decay and the such. It is much harder to take a child after you in case you need to evacuate. Yes, a child will always be curious, will always be wondering. It's probably easy to save. Usually, it's much better to save the wiser, hopefully, the better, the older spouse, whom you have, because most likely they are a normal human being like you, and obviously you will handle things much better. A child that oftentimes, even a family in these times, will feel more like an anchor. Yes. Now, I'm not saying definitely save the child or definitely save the spouse. I've always stated in this video that the answer differs per individuals. If you have a stupid spouse, but well, you chose to live by them, obviously, most likely, you will simply save the child. Yes. So there are different situations, different choices that people might take into account. There is one simple choice, yes, but a painful nonetheless. And obviously, people will make their choice based on their own experiences, based on their own relation with their child, and obviously with their spouse. Because someone who is ignorant, more like a narcissistic fucker, will definitely give up on both because they can't care about the child, they can't care about you anyways. They will simply always take into account their own survival. Yes? So, with this into account, the answer differs per individual. But make sure when you choose, think a bit about the future, think a bit about your mortality, because people come and people go. If a tragedy struck that took either of them, either your child or your spouse, well, the other one can also be claimed by another tragedy. So, living in a certain level of humility towards life may at least act as a tampon to your suffering. Because, let's be honest, you have lost, if you're at a certain age, most likely you have already lost some relatives, probably some parents. And yet again, hopefully that acted as a realization of your own mortality. I, for one, have been taken to burials ever since I was young, and it actually helped me root in this life. And it actually helped me quite a lot because being rooted in this life also means that I'm aware of my mortality. That is why I never kind of attached to either of my parents or grandparents, even if, well, the environment was somewhat toxic, but the love towards them still exists. However, I did not choose to attach to them, just like I did not choose not to attach to them. I simply lived life the way I felt intuitively. I never had any guidance in life, but I simply did not choose to attach nor to hate necessarily. Hatred was there because it was a toxic environment. But when my grandparents departed, each on their own turn, I did not feel remorse or bad or the such. In a way, I felt good because they were pretty old. They each perished at their age of 90. And at that age, my grandmother had dementia, and I've had some really tough months before she finally passed away. Finally, it was a relief for me, and obviously, it was also a relief for her because she also had several other problems and health issues like hepatitis C, I think it's called, and some kidney issues, and obviously dementia, which made my life a real living hell. My grandfather died somewhat a peaceful life. He lived a peaceful life and he passed away in a peaceful way. But still, he had some issues. He was taken to hospitals, and in the end, it was a bit of a nuisance for him to keep living like that. So, in a way, I felt relieved that he also passed away, at least in a very peaceful way. So, when these people live your life, you have to think at least once in your life. Once they were there, suddenly they just became a memory. Soon you will also be a memory to your children. It was a crippling event when it happened, or it was a regular event. It was something, yes? Like I did not cry necessarily. I did a certain prayer, I did a certain ritual after my grandmother died because I felt it intuitively, and things like that. It was pretty interesting. I never had done that before, but my intuition guided me on that. And well, whether it changed something or not, that doesn't matter much nowadays. The point is, when it happens, it did feel bad for me. You have to understand, you have a certain space allocated within your being for each and every one of your relatives, especially your parents. More importantly, your parents. When either of them passes away, you will feel a void within. This will happen even when you lose a child because now suddenly that space becomes empty. It is actually becoming empty from a real standpoint. It's not something that you think it is. Yes, it's not a belief, it's not a thought, it is reality how it functions. It will feel bad, you'll grieve, this and that, but life does not wait for you. Life will simply go on. To some people, it will take years to recover. To some people, it will take days. Some people will be right back after several hours or several days, several weeks, months, maybe years. But it differs per individual. Sooner or later, those people will be okay. Yes. In your case, whatever time it took, you most likely went over that. Yes. It's harder the more you feel attached to them, whether of necessity or, well, out of actually caring for them. But in the end, one has to remember that life will meet its end sooner or later. There is still life beyond the death of this physical body. But what happens afterwards, you should not bother your mind with that. Yes? So, in the end, live life the way you would want to truly live it. You only have one choice, you only have one life. And unfortunately, we live in a world where a lot of people choose to forsake this gift because of the hardships that they meet and the loneliness that crumbles them. Remember that your choices should be made in such a way that you end up close to better people than you. Yes, and be surrounded by people whom you can live by. Living life alone, especially after a certain age, can be very crippling. Not too many people can handle loneliness. Not too many people can handle suddenly losing someone. But that should always be a thought within your mind, because sooner or later it will happen. Yes? Hopefully this video raised a bit of awareness. You are appreciated, take care, enjoy life. This being said, Ferenjan Board signing out.